I've struggled on a number of occasions to teach young people skeletal anatomy, or which parts of the skeleton are named what might be a better way of describing that. And I think the main reason that young people find it a little bit tedious or a little bit boring, perhaps there's two reasons. One is about the words themselves. They don't sort of seem so intuitive, they don't seem so obvious why they're named what they are. So I'll try and address that in this presentation as well. But the other point was that I think people need a reason why. So why am I actually learning this material? Why do I need to know what this is called? So I'm going to try and explain to you from kind of a sports science perspective why it's useful as we go through the different articulations and the different bones that articulate at joints, and to try and help you understand why you might need to know these and what will actually benefit you as a student and potentially as a sports scientist to be able to use this terminology from today. So we're going to kind of start with some obvious points here. I don't really have an order to go through this, so we'll kind of just meander our way through this. The first area I want to actually have a look at is in the lower body. Okay, I'm going to start with joints. What we have here at the ankle is we have two bones in the lower leg. The first one, which is the bone in the shin, is what we refer to as your tibia. Okay, so this is a strong, thick, tough bone, very durable, takes most of your body weight, the tibia, so very important for body carriage. So for in terms of your walking, you're standing up straight, it takes a lot of your weight, and that is your body carriage that's achieved by the tibia. And you might be able to see that right next to the tibia we have this other kind of bone which arcs around and comes down. Whoops, didn't mean to do that last little line there. That comes down here, and it sort of sits alongside the tibia. And this one, much thinner bone, is called your fibula. Your fibula. And in terms of your weight carriage, the fibula only takes around about 5% of your weight, and 95% is carried by the tibia. But the fibula provides some important support, especially when we're moving sideways. So the fibula bone is one we need to know for lots of sporting activities, because it allows the strengthening of sideways movement, and that's why we kind of like to know about this particular bone. And I also wanted to add that there appears to be a space between the tibia and the fibula, but in fact there isn't. This sort of blue area I'm sketching in here is what we call sort of a fibrous fixed joint. It can't move, they can't move around one another in sort of as the wrist can, as a pivot, but they're actually fixed or fused together. So there's no movement between the two bones, but they're actually fused together with fibrous tissue. So coming down even further into the lower body, I'll just choose a slightly different colour to try and address this with, but we also have a number of bones which kind of form the ankle. The first one is here. I'm going to kind of draw it in here, and it's what we refer to as your talus bone. Your talus bone, and it articulates at the ankle. And there's another one which we like to be able to name, and it kind of is your heel bone. It sort of sticks out at the back here, and it's called your calcaneus or your calcaneus. I never really know how to say that, but your calcaneus or your calcaneus. Now then, it's a really, really important bone. It's the one, if you feel the back of your heel right at the point that as you go towards the bottom of your foot, that calcaneus is a really important bone, and it's really important because it's where the Achilles tendon inserts. So when your Achilles tendon applies force, of course it does so because your gastrocnemius, your calf, is contracting, it pulls on that heel, it pulls on that calcaneus, and if that calcaneus pulls up, the toes pull down or push down into a plantar flex position. So the calcaneus is a really important bone for us, and we need to be aware of that. Other bones in the foot, you need to know that these kind of small bones here are called your tarsals. Your tarsals. I don't really have too much more to say about that, other than to say that the ones right at the end are also called a different name, and we refer to those as your phalanges. Phalanges, and of course they're quite important bones for things like balance and for sort of fine adjustments to movement. So let's move up. Let's move up further at the body. In fact, let's go and have a look at the knee. Of course, you can actually see here that the knee has a bony process that covers it, and that bone, your kneecap, is called your patella. Now, something interesting about the patella, first of all, it does not articulate with any other bone. In fact, quite interestingly, it actually sits inside a tendon. So it sits inside a tendon. Not surprisingly, we call it the patella tendon. So it sits inside a tendon. It's almost like a protective feature of the knee. So it's a protective bone. Moving further up, let's sort of put this into yellow. We have this long, thin bone here. God, Ben, I'm terrible at colouring in, aren't I? Have this long, thin bone here, and we call this your femur. F-E-M-U-R, your femur. Now, the reason I think it's really important to have a good understanding of this word, and most of you will know the word femur already, I think, but the reason it's important to know this word is when we get to muscle names, because we have muscle names such as biceps, femoris, and of course this femoris bit means it sits along the femur, and in the case of the biceps femoris, it's actually one of your hamstring muscles. So the word femur is useful for you to know because it allows you to understand, well, okay, biceps, I've heard that, might be in the arm. Femoris, no, it's in the leg because it's near the femur. Okay, next one. Let's move up. We have here the pelvis. Looks a little bit like a butterfly, the pelvis. But we want a different name here, and we want to use the name the ilium. The ilium. So this pelvis is also known as the ilium. And of course it's the ilium and the femur that articulate at the ball and socket joint of the hip. So very important for us. You will know that the spine is your back. So let's just make note of the spine. Look, we have some examples of vertebra here. So we have the spine, and we call the spine, the individual segments, we call them vertebra. Okay, and collectively we call them your vertebrae. Your vertebrae, which is the plural term. I'm going to do a different video on the spine itself, so I won't go into too much detail about that right now, but moving further upwards, here we have the breastplate. I'm going to kind of draw around it here. We have the breastplate here, and this bone is called your sternum. Now, people might argue that's important for lots of reasons, because it protects part of the thoracic cavity, the chest, very important. But I'm going to tell you it's important because it's involved with breathing. So when we have to breathe faster and deeper, the sternum becomes an important bone, because the muscles which create faster, deeper breathing are actually attached to the sternum. So they're really important for us, or it's a really important part of the body for us. Of course, we have the ribs. I'm not going to say too much about that, but we have the ribs also surrounding the thoracic cavity as well. Okay, moving on. We have here, I'm going to go back into pink, we have here the bones that run across the sort of the front or the top of your chest, and those bones are called your clavicles. Clavicle, again, it's actually a fixed non-synovial joint at either end of the clavicle. They're completely fixed, completely fused, but importantly, that clavicle is also involved with breathing. It's also important because every time we fall from any distance, for example, we might be playing a sport which means we might get knocked over. If we land on our arms, we're very likely to injure our clavicle because it does take a lot of strain in landing positions as well. Okay, moving into the arms now. Let's have a look at the arms. It's sort of minty green here. I have the upper arm here, a little bit like the femur in the lower body, but in the upper body, in the arm, we call it the humerus. The humerus, and then into the lower body, the lower part of the arm, we have two bones in the arm. We have the radius, and we have the ulna. So we have the radius, and ulna. Now, of course, those two bones, the radius and ulna, actually articulate in a pivot joint, allowing you to turn your hand upwards and downwards. We call that pronation and supination. So important two bones, the radius and the ulna, because it allows you to invert your lower arm. So something like spin bowling and cricket, or indeed any kind of throwing, is really heavily dependent on that radius and ulnar mechanics. Okay, getting towards the end now. Can't really see it on here, but on the back of here, just sort of the back of the body, we have your shoulder blade, and we call this your scapula. And your scapula actually articulates with your humerus to produce your shoulder. So the scapula is your shoulder blade, and also sits along a large proportion of your back. Last couple. We also have in this area here, we have the joint of the cranium, which of course is your head, the cranium, and vertebra, or the upper vertebra. And this is referred to as your atlas and axis joint. Your atlas and axis joint, which I've talked about in previous videos, and allows you to pivot or rotate your neck. Okay, so that's where we're going to finish for now. I really should have talked about the carpals and the phalanges and the fingers, but well, that's where we are for now. I'll leave you at that point, and thanks for listening.